Or do I start?
Welcome to Health Tech Growth, the weekly podcast for healthcare founders and innovators, where we explore essential strategies to create successful and sustainable healthcare startups that improve patient outcomes and transform the healthcare industry.
Do we actually feel constrained? And how are we outcompete the tough market out there to gain the appropriate amount of funding, or chasing the funds that we have? Or do we focusing on the area, how can we just get to revenue faster? So then we can prove the point of we can do it. We have the team, we have the resources, we have the tech to deliver the big promise, this giant impact that we can create. So what is it? How do we actually get to a point that we can scale and having the people, the most aligned, passion-driven, impact-driven people behind us, especially from an investing side, and not be so fearful about what if a big VC firm coming into your company, oh, things is going to be really shaky up. And how do we see the value in the good collaboration and partnership as we dive into it? So thanks, Nathan, for joining here with us. I definitely wanted to dive into your story a little bit more and also the mission behind Hopelab. But before we get there, tell us a little bit more about your insight on that dynamic with the VC firm feeling like they need to be more cautious about their decisions nowadays.
Yeah, happy to. And just to correct you real quick, my name's Nathaan. No worries. Everybody messes it up. It's totally cool. So quick background. Again, Nathaan Demers, I'm a clinical psychologist, and then I was an operator in the startup world for about 8 years. And now I'm an investor, principal investor with Hopelab. And I think nowadays, especially what we've seen with all the uncertainty leading up to this election, that a lot of investors were a little bit more cautionary, if you will, with investments, and that they wanted to de-risk things as much as they could, and were waiting to deploy funds in some ways to later stage. Or some companies, investment firms that were saying, we'd like to see 1 million in ARR, are all of a sudden saying we'd like to see 2 million in ARR before we invest. So it's been a bit of a shift for sure.
Yeah, and with that shift, what have you seen the common challenges with these solutions coming out of the pipeline? Either perhaps is that the earlier pre-seed areas of solutions that we still see is promising, but we're like putting in the back burner, versus does that feel like it become a more competitive, or perhaps from the investor side, oh, there are more options when you are going to the higher level of funding stage?
Yeah, I do think there are slightly more options, when you are later stage. And I think this really, to zoom way back, and I think this is some of the work that you and your company provides, is connecting founders with the right type of capital is so important. And at Hopelab, again, we're a nonprofit making equity investments in for-profit companies, but we really see that founder education is so important. And then that if you're trying, for example, we invest in companies exclusively serving the mental health and well-being of adolescents and young adults, and we do so with an equity focus. And one thing we know, that if you're a mental health company providing services to severe and persistent mentally ill populations with Medicaid, you're not going to be a unicorn overnight. That takes long years of hard work. And with that, we think it's really important to say, you know what, I shouldn't have projections for this VC that show me with a rocket ship to the moon up and to the right, because you're setting yourself up to fail. And you're also setting yourself up to likely not give the best quality clinical care to those really at-risk populations. So one thing we like to talk about is just make sure founders know that there are grant options out there. There's NIH grants. There's more social impact oriented funds that can provide that time to have responsible and sustainable growth in some of these really important sectors.
Yeah, I think it was critical in that side is that there are multiple different options in growth. And yes, sometimes if grant writing takes the time, right? There's a deadline and you have to prepare yourself. So having the right people to do the research, prepare that, it's important. At the same time, it's also important to look into companies like Hopelab and any other area of VCs who supports your specific initiative. And that gave a better buy-in of matching each other's value. Because at the end of the day, it's not that, oh, all of us just gonna jump in and dive into any project or any company. We still have to believe in your vision and what you're saying about you have to clearly present that and not shoot a moon, right? If we don't feel the reality in what it could actually be, I think that's one of the major mistakes that we also see a lot of time is that when I ask people, okay, how much you're raising, what's it for? It's this very high level thinking idea, or it become, oh, I just need to put more money on my tech. I'm just going to launch the next phase.
Right.
How? Like, what does that mean, right? Did you have a contract already? Did you calculate a projection? And how is that newer level or fancy bell whistle that you're putting into it actually going to attract more user base or retaining the existing ones? What does that mean? Right? So do you see that often as well, just the non-clarity that coming from some of the proposals?
Yeah, I think that's a very fair question. And the reality is in health tech, when you're working with payers or Medicaid or whatever it might be, is it takes time. I love looking at pipelines, and making sure that those pipelines are really realistic is really the challenge for both founders and investors to make sure that they're aligned on. Again, being a founder, of course, you want to be the most tenaciously, or not founder, but a member of a founding team. You want to be tenaciously optimistic, and you want to say we're going to close 90% of this pipeline. And we know in healthcare that's not realistic. And generally my attitude is like most pipelines, you have to take a third off of what you think is going to close, a third to a half, and also say it's probably going to take a third to a half more time and more resources to get there. And again, that expectation setting with any investor relationship is really important to make sure that you're seeing eye to eye and setting goals that feel realistic and like a win for all parties.
Right. It's the expectation. I think most of the time I describe as, oh, we're going on the first day, right? Everyone's excited, everyone's cheerful, and is
Everything's
motivated.
perfect.
Everything's perfect. And then you're like, oh, okay, so we have to talk about a little detail, reality, right? How are we gonna do this? And then it becomes, let me get back to you on that, right?
Yeah.
But when you get back to it, what's the time frame? What do you think is that proposal? How you're presenting this? That's important. If they're not really quite prepared to say, hey, I'll get back to you in an hour, right? Because they're mostly probably have that thought out. They're just putting a final dot. But if they haven't done their homework, then a week go by, then you see something popping into your inbox. I feel like that's also another thing about where start to lose the momentum or the trust.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of places that you can lose momentum and trust. And in my opinion, it really comes down to transparency. And we like to be really founder focused and founder friendly, and share exactly what we're looking for, what we're not looking for, and then also set realistic timeframes. We know that the jobs of founders and startups is really difficult, and adding a bunch of hurdles doesn't feel like an awesome or fair thing. And again, I feel really fortunate to have been on both sides of this experience. So that's our approach, but we also know that there's a lot of different VCs out there with different metrics and different goals and different ways of doing things. So again, we're most interested in responsible and sustainable growth. And we really are looking for market rate returns while also acknowledging that getting there might take a little bit more time in some ways.
Exactly. And not to get discouraged when sometimes that no is actually a learning opportunity for you to actually get to a better spot and be able to daring enough to follow up on how you can improve.
Definitely.
And
And a no's the second best answer for sure. It lets you move on, learn, and go to the next.
exactly. So when you guys say yes and no, what do you think are some of the key points that you're looking for?
Mhm. Again, we really like to balance impact and potential return profile, again, as a social impact fund. We also really go out of our way and like to invest in folks that have historically had difficulties raising. So we know that BIPOC founders, female founders, LGBTQ plus founders, Research shows that they oftentimes have to have twice as many meetings to get the same level as investment as majority populations. So we really like to try and make sure that we're trying to create an equal playing field. And we're really proud in that we have about half of our portfolio are female founders. And diversity obviously can mean a lot of things in terms of race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, and all of that. But we have an incredibly diverse, I have a phone call coming in. I just have to stop it. Incredibly diverse group of founders within our 22 portfolio companies, which is awesome. So that's all really important. But of course, we want to find companies that are going to be sustainable, have that responsible growth, that they're working in a market that is going to work. They're being realistic. And of course, have potential for a good positive return profile.
Yeah, I think those are critical points. Is that I believe like a recent study I read, the top reasons for a company to fail despite even acquiring Series A funding is that poor founder synergy from the beginning,
Which
right?
happens, unfortunately. Yeah.
Yeah. And then for us, it's like, whoa, okay, now you guys are part from a consultant level. I'm like, oh, there's a hole in the company. How do we quickly fill that, right? And
Right.
then from the investor side, it's like, okay, what's the relationship, a legal conversation you guys have said to divide up that equity or some other way,
hmm
right? And not pulling the company apart. Um,
Right.
so it is a crucial thing. And then that's why we talk so much on alignment. What does that mean for those people? Is that
hmm
are you on the highest purpose you're meant to be, or this is a transient? And if it's
Right.
transient, we should know to wait ahead of time and not putting you under pressure. And then now you realize it's not your thing anymore.
hmm Absolutely. And I think I have a lot of empathy. And again, having been there, it's really hard to say no to money. But if the investors aren't seeing eye to eye and that doesn't feel like a fit, I feel it's really important to say no to that person if they're going to incidentally sort of distract you from your mission and vision.
Exactly. And at the end of the day, we can do 10 million things, right? And resources always going to be out there. And we have to have that abundant side to see, believe in ourselves, to be daring enough to be okay to move on.
hmm
And that will just simply get you to the yeses and the right yeses not much faster.
hmm
Uh, and yes, it's a tough market out there, but no matter what, there are possibilities that we're seeing that will work,
hmm
and especially with you guys having such diverse culture, gender, and just a support system. Does that seem like that's always where you guys are laying and focusing on? That's why it's naturally attracting these founders to you, or has been a core messaging that you guys been talking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's both and in that equity has been baked into the DNA of Hopelab, and that we want to support traditionally underserved populations. And again, that can mean BIPOC, LGBTQ plus, low SES, rural populations. There's a lot of different ways to define that. But with that, again, we really want to support these people because we believe that folks with lived experience, individuals who are persons of color, have a better likelihood of developing tools and products that can scale and serve those populations. So it's a very much a virtuous cycle. And another demographic we didn't mention are folks with lived experience. So we're investing in mental health companies. Being able to invest in a founder who has lived experience with mental health, we think in the long run is likely going to lead to a much more consumer or patient driven tool, which again is going to lead to more consumers, more retention, and ideally more impact and of course return.
Right. It's the conversation about personal branding. When you build a brand, there's a brand identity. And us, the leader, the founders, the executive team, people are representing the brand. So when people are so involved themselves into it, and it make a lot more sense for them to be the center of attention. And yet, sometimes we also know not everyone is natural speaker and not everyone
hmm
like to be upfront and in the center. And but it's all trainable, right? No one just
hmm
come out, I know how to speak on stage. I didn't
Right.
do a TED talk just prepared today and run yesterday. That was like a
Right.
6 months of process
hmm
of writing, re-engaging, talking to everybody else who are professional speakers to get you to a place. And the thought process is everything is figure outable and learnable, right? We have to just understand that is our core, right? You are the representing of your brand. So be out there, be in the spotlight, knowing how to leverage the spotlight and continue to grow that authority, right? Just like what we do here, we love speaking to investors, established founders to share their story and then put them into our impact award, right? Get them even bigger engagement and learning how to bring on people from your community and not just only see you in the spotlight. It's actually having those authentic communication so they continue to trust you, build the relationship, and be your champions. And that championship doesn't come one day, right? We need to nurture those relationships. And it's one of the mission that we have is, well, everyone has difficulty being in front of investors, but what if we can bring that investor to you and then have you a little bit more prepared, and through the process also think about, all right, we're end of year. What are all the major components of my business that are creating impact? Am I leveling up? And how would I do that going into Q1, right? So as everybody thinking about all the meetings, the conferences you're going into, definitely be more thoughtful about how is everything going to interconnect with each other as you move and creating impact into the next years. And I think that's also perhaps you can tap into a little bit more of why do we even care about meeting people in person, right? Going to conferences, and sometimes it's overwhelming, and then still feeling like we're walking down the hall. A lot of companies are presenting too similar to each other, and when they are not truly standing out, it also doesn't give us the trust of having that second or third meeting.
Yeah, I agree with a lot of that. And the one thing I will add, I think we're seeing eye to eye, but just to, it's great to practice. It's great to do the things you're good at. And it's also essential that you're authentic. It's really hard, again, going back to that fit and transparency. If you are perfectly polished and not being yourself when you're pitching, you're entering likely into a 5 to 10 year relationship with most investors. And at some point, those layers of the onion or, mask, whatever analogy you want to use, might fall off. And going back to that scenario that you mentioned where companies don't make it to Series A, sometimes it's because of a lack of a quality relationship and seeing eye to eye between the founding team and investors. So I just encourage all of you founders out there to do your homework on the firms that you're reaching out to as much as they are you. Make sure that it's really feeling like a fit, and be yourself, because if you're not being yourself, you're just kind of delaying what might be a real problem down the road.
Exactly. And be yourself and make sure you really understand your whole team and let them shine, and then see how you're synchronize all of your energy, your resources together, and how that will really match the values and the principles of the investors that you guys are working with. Last question we always like to ask is that because you guys are working with women-led companies and equitable companies, what do you see as a common mistake or blind spots that most of you have come across, and you hoping that they don't get into that trap?
hmm Yeah, it's really challenging, and of course, there's a number of different pitfalls and hurdles depending on time, stage, your company, sector, and all of those things. But I guess one thing that, again, it's not necessarily fair, it's just a reality, and again, research supports it, is that oftentimes folks who are from, non-majority statuses, if you will, end up having to do more work to get the same amount of funding. And I think going into the funding process, knowing that that is likely the reality, can be really helpful, because it's not always helpful to look over your friend who might be a white male, went to Yale, and is able to raise after 3 or 4 meetings. Knowing that this might be a harder process is really important to, in my opinion, develop empathy for yourself. And then surrounding yourself with folks who are supportive. And you can get 99 no's. If you get one of the right yeses, that can be okay. So making sure that you're taking a resilient approach, surrounding yourself with the right people, and just being realistic with what the path might be.
Yes, and when we are give ourselves more grace, more empathy, and that's really all of the 5 level of high performance of the SAGE type of brain that we always talk about from positive psychology. Is that we have to first give ourselves the empathy, so then we can feel the empathy toward the whole situation with our team. Because at the end of the day, everyone is working hard. We just have to make sure we're working hard toward the right thing and not get so busy and overwhelmed and on the wrong path. So we definitely appreciate this conversation, and I'm glad that you guys are able to join us. Again, check out Hopelab, especially if you are in that mental health space. And we will love for you guys to comment below. What is the one major takeaway that you have from our conversation? And what suggestions do you have for your fellow founders and the entire healthcare innovative family that we're all supporting here? For those of you who are in seed level or higher funding, apply to postpointpass.com/awards. We can't wait to see if you are one of our 6 winners. And congratulations for everything that you have already done so far. We do all deserve a celebration. And until next time, hopefully that we're going to have a lot more amazing conversation with amazing investors, just like Hopelab initiative. And any last word before we jump off?
No, appreciate the time, and reach out if you have any questions.
Awesome.
Thank you for listening to Health Tech Growth. If you're a healthcare tech innovator or founder interested in being a featured guest on our show, visit healthtechgrowth.io to learn more.